There we go. Good to go.
Right, so good to be here and to share this short presentation, and we can answer some questions along the way when you're ready. So let's have a go. Right, so children have already gone back to school and you'll be having conversations about support. Some of your children may already have the education, health and care plan. Some of your children may not already be attending full time. There may already have been discussions about SEN support, and you might have gone to school and feel that some questions have arisen that you didn't already have in mind. So after the holidays, when it's much more free and relaxed, there aren't those worries about school, going to a new class, the changes can be difficult for some children. Maybe last year things didn't go well. They might be nervous because they're worried about someone in their playground or their friend isn't in their class. And just maybe there were problems with how they were learning, or they didn't feel that they could learn. So you would usually have had some either virtual or in-person contact with the new teacher and maybe all the new staff that are in the classroom. And in some cases, the SENCO will already have been involved in the transition process and have shared additional information, and that there will have been handover meetings between teachers about your child, so that the information is going up with them. So I've just said that, different children will be at different stages. Some may already have had SEN support. They might have the plan in place, or some new queries have come to light just recently. The most important thing is to ask for a meeting with the class teacher and the SENCO, if necessary, to help you prepare in advance about the outcomes that you are aiming for. Don't leave it, do that quickly so that you're not anxious and things don't escalate. So when you have that conversation, you'll be asking how they might address your concerns about a particular area, maybe in English, for instance, reading is a problem, or phonics, or maybe it's playtimes and your child is anxious about playtimes. Whatever you discuss, ask about how that's going to be recorded, what kind of plan will be put together, and how that plan will be reviewed. And you'll also want to put a date in the diary so that you have an agreed time when you will discuss this again. So it might be as short as a week or a couple of weeks, so that things have had time to be put into place. Later on, it might be half a term. But additionally, if there are any other needs that your school might not have had an update on, and they might be health needs, make sure that they're fully appraised of the facts. They know what's happening, which professionals are working with you, and help them to put together a care plan if that is needed, so that the school are doing the right things to support your child. Some children might not be in school full time. If they're in Year R, that might already have been agreed. It might be your view that they aren't ready, and you will have discussed this. The school might equally have said, we've got some concerns and we think a more gradual approach is needed. But that has to be agreed with you. Reduced hours provision is not a resolution for behaviour difficulties or to be used as a sanction, and it should always be short term, and it should be regularly reviewed and with a plan about how it will be increased as quickly as possible, so that your child is receiving the full-time education that they're entitled to and accessing it as well. So the Inclusion Support Service at Hampshire, the local authority, must be notified by the school that your child is on a reduced hours timetable, and they will be monitoring that. For some families, it's a very difficult time because your child hasn't got a place in school at all. If they already have an education, health and care plan, continue to work with the caseworker at the local authority, ask for different advice about schools that might be suitable for your school, and continue to work for them. Have a look at schools if you can, organise to go and see them. And if you're on a border, don't forget you can look beyond Hampshire, and there is information out there about schools in Surrey or Wiltshire, for instance. So if any EHCP isn't in place, you can talk to the local authority admissions team, and I've got some contact details there. And if you need interpreters, please contact the language lines, and they will provide an interpreter to talk to you. One thing that some families struggle with is getting on with the new teacher. You may have had a previous teacher that really understood your child, and you have a feeling that maybe this one doesn't. So it's important to try and establish a working relationship as soon as possible. Things that you can do are reinforce the school rules, help your child to understand them and follow them. Help them to be prepared to go to school with everything they need. So their PE kits on the right day, their lunch, their reading book, any forms that need to be given in for trips, for instance. Booking the lunch as well, paying for that. And try and encourage your child to complete homework and help them if you can. That might be something that's on the website, or it might be a paper activity or even reading. When it's time for parents' evening, book an appointment and please turn up, or do let them know in plenty of time that you can't attend, and see if you can rearrange. It's much easier than just not turning up and then having that difficult conversation about how are we going to get there. I've mentioned forms and lunches. If you're emailing the school, please keep it concise and to the point, and only copy in the staff that really need to see that email. And where emails are happening, you should already have a relationship with that person, so the teacher or the head, if you're asking for a meeting, for instance. And be open-minded. Your child might be very different at school. Sometimes the school don't see the child you see. Sometimes children mask their behaviour. They hold all their emotions in and show it at home. Sometimes it's the other way around. They might be very different. So be prepared to have that conversation and accept that there might be a different view. What it's best not to do is to approach the teacher first thing in the morning when all the children are coming in. If it's urgent, go to the office and speak and ask for an appointment, or ask them to give them a message, or write a note for the teacher. Quite often the class TA might be the person that you see first in the morning, so the same applies there. And it's really hard, especially with a first child or a child you're worried about, not to be that helicopter parent, but to try and build that relationship that is built on trust and understanding of your child's needs. So here are our contact details, and if you have any particular questions that you want to ask us, contact us and we will give you information, advice, and in some instances support as well. And we hope that that will be helpful. And that's the end of my presentation, Sarah. So I'll stop sharing.
Super, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure I will get some questions as some people get some thoughts in their head. My thought watching that, and it's not really a question, it's more of a discussion point. What would you recommend as a good way of communicating with school? Because I think that is the thing that is the most challenging for people. And I think also the structures you're describing work in a primary school where your child is dealing with a teacher, but in a secondary school it's a very, very different thing. And is there a communication structure that you recommend, trying to set up with the school?
The children in secondary do go to a tutor group, don't they, at the beginning of the day? So the tutor is probably the first point of call, and also the heads of year, if it's something that needs to go beyond that. And best to email to us when you can either meet or speak on the phone to them, when would be a good time to do that. And sometimes a note, some people have a communication book, but that can be tricky as well to maintain. That is quite a commitment.
That's certainly what we did with my daughter from reception. And to begin with, we had essays every day, and then as time went on, because she was able to tell us more, there was little bits, and now we don't, and the risk is it becomes a bit of a crutch, and now I feel a bit naked without it. But it's just finding new ways, isn't it, of communicating?
And I think the key thing is to really think about how crucial it is that you do communicate. And if you are emailing, who is the best person to email it to? Is it the head of year? Is it the tutor? And being really clear about what you're asking and what kind of response you want, because the school will equally want to be responding as well as they can to your requests, and nobody wants that table tennis of lots of emails back and forth. But ultimately, if an email's not going to achieve the outcome you need, it's asking early on for a meeting with either the tutor, the teacher, the SENCO, whoever is the most appropriate member of staff.
I've got a question coming for you. What laws, regulations or statutory regs, I guess code of practice, etc., can we refer to if our child is on reduced hours and the school is being obstructive or reluctant to increase those hours? So what are the rules around that? I know you're only supposed to be on it for, I think, a fixed amount of time.
It's really in agreement, and it's meant to be short amount of time. And the inclusion team are the people there, the Hampshire inclusion team people would be them. But I would have to look up the code of practice, the actual regulations. I can't tell you off the top of my head what they were, but maybe I can come back in a minute and have a look at those for you.
But ultimately, I mean, my understanding from watching one of your colleagues do a presentation on it is that it shouldn't be an open-ended agreement. There should be a timing on it when it should be being reviewed.
Yeah, well, it's meant to just be a small number of weeks, so up to half term potentially, but it really does depend on individual circumstances. But it's short and agreed. That's the key thing. Yeah,
someone's just suggested that perhaps it's 6 weeks, and then I guess you review it and then set again. Well, no, I know when we looked at it before, it was supposed to only be short bits. Really short, but reviewed regularly. So you wouldn't just leave it 6 weeks. You'd be reviewing it along the way. So maybe every couple of weeks. I don't know if the questioner had seen. We did do a session with the inclusion manager, and it's probably on YouTube, so we'll have a look in a second. Yeah. And one of the things they talked about was that Ofsted take a note of the number of children that are on those reduced hours, and that actually that is potentially a port of call as well. I will see if I can find the recording of that, if it was recorded. Sure. If I can't find it now, I will pass it on later. Yeah, Hampshire Inclusion do monitor that, so they will be looking at the schools that have got a lot of people on. The schools have to notify them, you see, if they have a child on part-time hours, they know how many they've got there. And when does part-time hours have to become a formal thing? If you've got a child where you've got a parent who's getting rung up on 3 days out of 5 to say, oh, he can't manage the afternoon, can you come and get him? At what point does that have to become a formal arrangement? No, that's not part-time hours, that's an informal exclusion. Right. Okay.
No, it's part-time hours. For example, a child where they've gone to a school and it's immediately obvious it's not the right placement, but there's not an alternative immediately available. And the parent and the child say, this isn't the right place, but while we're looking, let's try, or while we're trying to resolve this, let's try a reduced timetable for the next couple of weeks, see if that's working, look at it. Then in the meantime, who are we talking to? Are we talking to the SEN team, the inclusion team? If that you're being rung up and saying, come and collect the child, that's an informal exclusion. So that's very different type of.
And if that's happening on a regular basis, because I know that some people with this new school year and new teachers, I've heard that in my get-togethers, you know, a teacher who last year had worked out how to operate with a child this year is struggling. You know, when should flags be raised and something more, you know, if it's happening on a regular basis, what's the next step?
Well, it's illegal to do that anyway. So the first thing is to have the SENCO together with the class teacher to be discussing it and discussing why they need to reduce the timetable. So when inclusion have previously said, it's where there's a context and a structure and it's agreed, that's okay to do it for a short period of time. That it's not okay to just ring up and say, no, it's not working, come get your child, because then that becomes an informal and illegal procedure. You know, it's not lawful. Not lawful is the word.
Okay. That's sometimes having the right language really helps. Okay, so I've just got one here I'm going to read out for you, which I think potentially carries on. So this is on the same sort of point. Can a school reduce a child's timetable on the basis of them saying that there is no one there to look after, support your child at the end of the day? We're talking about 15 minutes at the end of the day, but it's still reduced as the school day ends at 15:25 and I have to collect them at 15:10. It was suggested that perhaps I can go in and be there at that time. So that's basically the scenario I've just been describing, isn't it? So where a school is saying, well, we can't manage these last 15 minutes. Well, what's the scenario with that?
Well, if it's the school day, then they should have somebody there to be looking after. If it's in their plan, if it's in the education, health and care plan, then they should have. If it's SEN support, you know, what can the school do to support? I think, again, it goes back down to what the individual reason is. And if they've got funding for one-to-one support at the end of the day, that's different. But it is, I don't believe the school can say, we can't look after your child at the end of the day. I think that person should contact us and let's look at.
I think that person probably is it. Knowing who's asking the question, I think they probably are already in contact. But yeah, I think it's one of those things. I think, you know, lots of different excuses are sometimes used by schools for, you know, why they're struggling. Continuing on a similar theme, how many times per term are a school allowed to exclude a child before they are legally obliged to provide alternative arrangements, including the possibility of an alternative education setting? Yeah, because which is sort of what I was getting at, because if a school is saying this 3 times a week or whatever, at what point do we need to move that forward and say something else has to be done?
Well, after the on the 6th day, they should be looking at alternative provision.
On the 6th day? So yeah. The 6th, so it would either be the 6th continuous day or on the 6th occasion. So if it doesn't happen.
I read this up just before we came on because I knew there'd be an exclusion question. So a fixed term one is an agreed time. Well, the school says it's this length of time. So fixed term exclusions can be for part of a day or for a period of days, but limited up to 45 school days in one academic year. It cannot be extended into a longer fixed term exclusion or converted to a permanent exclusion. The first 5 days of a fixed term exclusion, the school should send work home for the young person and mark it if it's returned. I am reading this to you.
Yeah.
DFE. From the 6th school day, alternative education provision must be arranged. These days are cumulative throughout the single school term. So, for example, the 6th one-day fixed term exclusion for a young person in one term must result in alternative education provision being made for that day. This will normally be in a pupil referral unit.
Okay, so that does imply that if on 6 separate occasions a child is informally excluded, then on the sixth occasion something must start to happen. I'm just kind of thinking this through. Pupil referral units. I know that's something with secondary age children, but with primary age children?
Yeah, there will be outreach, maybe
right.
They'll be doing some outreach, but that is something different needs to be happening. So the SEN team or the inclusion team would be involved.
Marina, where are you finding that from? I thought that's rather useful. Are you able to copy the link of wherever you found that and pop it in the chat for me to share? Because I think, I'm sure there's at least 2 or 3 people on the call who would like to be able to quote from that, because I actually think that's really quite interesting. The bit that slightly throws me that is the 45-day bit, though. In a school year.
Okay.
That's 9 weeks, isn't it?
Yeah. Let me find it for you. Do you want to carry on talking amongst yourselves?
We can carry on talking amongst ourselves. So hang on, I can see other bits. It's my regular caller here asking another question. Where can a parent go if their child is being excluded, but they know the school isn't reporting the exclusions? Now, this is where I would like to see if I can find you the recording that we did from the inclusion team. And I cannot remember if we recorded it. And certainly, Ofsted is one place that you can go. The challenge with going to Ofsted is I think you're reporting it as an occurrence, but I don't think it's going to change anything. So you're sort of putting it down as a black mark against the school, but it's not going to suddenly result in your child or young person being back in school, which is ultimately what we all want, not for them to be at home. I'm guessing the other place that you go is the Hampshire Inclusion Service.
Yeah, absolutely.
The telephone number, which I will find as well in a note. Was it on the slide, the Hampshire Inclusion Service number? I shall find it in a second.
I'll have a look again in a minute. I'm just looking up this.
Don't worry, we're trying to do 6 things at once.
I've not got the link there. I'm just
if you can't find it now, don't worry, and we will share it when we share the presentation, because I just think that's a really useful little bit of information that you had there. Okay, annual reviews. Can I ask you a question? Tell me when you're ready for me to find something.
Yeah, that's okay.
Annual reviews. I know that some people are sort of awaiting annual reviews at this time of year, and it's a tricky time of year to have an annual review because you've only just got back to school and started bedding in, and particularly if it's the child going into reception. So I sort of want to ask a question around how early is it in the year? Is it too early to have an annual review? Would you say wait until after half term when you know what's going on? Or
well, it depends when the last one was. So if it's a year R child, have they already got an EHCP?
Yeah.
When was the last one? Because it has to be within 12 months. So if there are issues or there's difficulties, then you can have ask for an early annual review. If your child is in year 6, say, and they're going to secondary school, then it has to be all completed by 15th February, because there's that transfer time. And then if it's post 16, it's the March date that has to be done by March, so that they're ready to go on to the secondary college. So it really depends which year group the child's in. If it's just a straightforward annual review, it's 1 year from the last one. Obviously, the year R children coming up, not many will have an EHCP, but they might. So it will be 1 year from the date it was issued, unless there are worries and you need to make changes, and then it can be asked for earlier.
I think sometimes I forget, perhaps potentially in this case, the EHCP is a broader document than how you're doing that year at school. And I think sometimes, you know, you almost need two different documents, one that says this is our plan for this year at school, and then the overriding EHCP. And of course, with the constant change of staff, I think at school, it can just throw things out.
It should be, the EHCP should be reviewed every term anyway, because that is in the code of practice. It needs to be reviewed 3 times a year for that very reason. So parents' evenings are sometimes time to do that, but sometimes the SENCO would be involved, and it would be different, or in addition to that meeting.
And of course, we used to have, under the statement process, we used to have individual education plans as part of the statement process. But am I right in saying those are no longer necessary? Interestingly, my last school did carry on calling them IEPs, and that's what we carried on doing, so that we did have a term by term plan. But
lots of schools have called them different names, but in essence, lots of schools still are having something like an IEP. So they sometimes call it a personal profile, a support profile. There are all sorts of names, which isn't always helpful in this sort of instance, because when it was universal, you knew what you were talking about. But lots of schools do have a provision plan, say, where they map it out. But there should always be the outcomes that are being looked for, how they're tracking the progress, and when the review date is. So yeah, the EHCP must be reviewed 3 times a year.
And those, I think you said provision maps, you called them. Those aren't just for children with EHCPs, are they? They're actually for children that are on the SEN register as well. So is that right?
Yes, yeah. But with the EHCP, that's all recorded in there. But that kind of meeting where they do review everything, so that does need to be held every term.
So if you've got a child who is, for example, going through the EHCP process but hasn't got an EHCP yet, they should still be having those termly reviews and looking at outcomes, and
still have the support recorded and be reviewed 3 times a year.
Yeah,
at minimum. Some schools will do more.
Yeah, I think sometimes, I'm not so sure, we didn't used to do it half termly, which I think would make it 6 times a year. But
yeah, some schools will do that.
Yeah. Right, if you believe your child needs new reports or assessments from the likes of OT or speech and language therapy as part of the annual review, who is responsible for arranging and funding these? Is it the school or the local authority?
They need to be requested at the annual review and marked on the actual, in the amendments. It does say at the end, are any amendments needed? And it must be written into it. So the school need to write it in and request that the local authority carry out those assessments.
So after the annual review, so they don't feed into the annual review?
The request feeds into the annual review.
Right.
And then it's actioned.
Okay.
Or if it's denied, then it's that opens up that appeal process.
Okay. Interesting. Somebody's just commented, and I don't know the answer, and you might, Marina. I think for an IEP, or whatever we want to call it, provision mapping, the 3 reviews a year is a should, not a must in the code of practice. One of those lovely woolly words. I'm not sure. It could well be a should, not a must.
Yeah, but I think it's more likely to be more often than that, because if there is one, what's the point having it if you're not reviewing it? And definitely request it anyway. And if at any point you're not happy, again, go back and say, I'm not happy, can we look at the plan? That there is that negotiation there as well.
And I think the thing is, it's in everybody's best interest to get a plan right, because if you can get a plan right, the plan should support the school as well, and getting the support they need to support your child or young person. I know certainly, it might be that the school needs some more training, or whatever it is. I think often we think that the plans just provide for the child or young person, but actually they can provide for the setting as well, can't they, in terms of providing more support for them.
So if you think about SEN support though, Sarah, it's called the graduated approach. So this is where there's not an EHC plan. And it's the plan, do, assess, review. So there is that process. and that is in the code of practice, and that's how it works. So you do need to, schools will be doing that. It's expected.
I think you mentioned that those reviews could take place as part of a parents' evening. So somebody said, surely if they're part of a parents' evening, then extra time must be allowed due to the complexity of the discussions. Yeah. I know I was that nightmare parent that nobody ever wanted to be behind in a parents' evening because 10 minutes isn't long enough.
No, that's when I said, you know, there might be a Senko meeting as well to support that. It might be touched on, but you're right, it does need more than 10 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever your school is allocating for those meetings, but it needs to be a thorough discussion, and it should be it's a planned one. It shouldn't be sprung on you, you know, a date that's agreed to go through it.
Is that so? Because you have to have, is it 2 weeks you have to have notice of an annual review? No, or is it more? No, you have to have the paperwork 2 weeks. Remind me,
yeah, you should have the paperwork 2 weeks before. Sometimes that doesn't happen, and I think if the school isn't giving you time to prepare, then you should ask for a different date. They are required to give you 2 weeks notice.
So could they legitimately give you the paperwork and notification of the meeting on the same day, assuming it was 2 weeks before, or do you have to have further notice ahead of the meeting, of the date?
Do you mean the paperwork 2 weeks before and say the date's in 2 weeks' time?
Yes, literally. So the first you know of the annual review is the paperwork arrives and they're telling you the meeting's in 2 weeks' time.
Well, they might do that, but then again, you'd have to go back and say that's not going to work for me. So
only because I've heard of that one recently. That's one that's come up in one of my
we've had them where they've not had 2 weeks, anywhere near 2 weeks, and been told, you know, the annual reviews in 3 days or something. So no, it is required that
I think it's not unusual to not have the paperwork 2 weeks before. I think that's a luxury often. It shouldn't be, should it? And I think as a parent, you end up kind of tossing in the air which is the better thing, to get the annual review done with the paperwork that you've got a bit late or whatever.
Well, the thing is, the professionals that are involved need to write reports, don't they? And they might not have their report ready. So the more notice they're given of the date, the more prepared everybody is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, I think I've gone through all the bits I've got here. I'm just going to whiz back through. Oh, one new message. There we go.
I've just put one in with the,
is that you? Is that the link? Right, I'm just going to, this link, which is quite long, folks, is the link to that little bit that Marina read out for us.
That's the whole document. I've got a page that I've got from there, so it should be in that one.
So that you should be able to just click on that so you don't lose it from the chat, and then it'll be open on your computer or your phone or whatever. Or I'll also share that on certainly on my HPCN page. Any advice on school trips and how school should look to support my child without just asking me to go along? Oh, that's a really common one, isn't it?
Yeah. What kind of trip are you talking about?
Stacey, do you want to just unmute for a second and tell us?
Yeah, sure. One is a day trip, which is happening tomorrow, and then a 2-night residential.
When did they give you note, and when have they told you that you need to go, Stacey?
Last Friday.
Okay.
So the day trip, let's do that one first. What kind of day trip is it? Where are you going?
To a cathedral. So it's a tour around and some classroom-based activities.
Okay, and what's the reason why they've asked you to
go? Because they don't believe that he'll be able to manage without me, and they've got a lack of staff to kind of support him.
Are they asking you to actually look after your own child?
Yes.
Okay, and is there an EHC plan?
No, we are currently in draft stage, but he's on their SEN register.
Okay. Oh, that's really hard, isn't it? Is it for health needs or other that they need the support?
Other, it's for behavioural.
Right. Okay. So, Oh goodness, I'm not sure I can answer that straight off. They can't exclude your child from going, that's for sure. So if you're not able to go, have you or you don't think it's right that you go, have you discussed it with them?
Yes, in a way, it wasn't told that if you don't go, he can't go, but that's how it's kind of been voiced.
I think you might need to give us a ring, Stacey, afterwards, so we can talk that through with you. But they can't discriminate and say he can't go if he's got SEN, and they will need to make provision. But I think that one, I'd rather you ring us separately, especially about the residential.
I think it's really tricky, Stacey, and certainly I've done a bit of both over the years. So I've never gone on a day trip with my daughter, bearing in mind that she has an EHCP and she has a helper. And if you get to that point, I think if you've got staff in school for your child, there is absolutely no reason why you should go on a day trip if there is staff allocated to your child. The first time Zoe did a residential, her staff agreed that they would go with her. And now, of course, that's not necessarily covered in your EHCP because you're now talking kind of over school hours. So it's a tricky one. And I know people who've played that both ways. I know people who have gone on residentials, but they have only effectively supported their child overnight, and their one-to-one has supported them during the day. And you know, that you could argue that's a good compromise. But it's a really, really tricky one. And I think one of the things to look at is what your child's experience will be of the event. For me, I've always been concerned that my presence there would change my daughter's experiencing of the event to her detriment. And then you ask, why are they going?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've already had that with him. He doesn't want me there. If this is the second time now. But it's tomorrow, so we're a little bit tight on time, and you know, I want him to have an experience of going to a school trip. I see it, you know, if I don't send him, I think that will be a worse outcome for him than me going. Are there ways around it? Like, could you take him to, rather than him doing things like dealing with the coach, which are, I think, often, and I'm sorry, everybody, I know we've gone down a rabbit hole now and we're dealing about a particular issue, but school trips are one of those things that I know everybody will have issues with. So I know one of the other things I've seen people do in the past is to sort of deliver their child to the school trip, as it were, because if they've got there without the pressure of the coach, then actually they can deal with the day bit and then you can kind of whip them away at the end. I've just got a little bit for you here. Darren here sending me bits of info. The Equality Act 2010 states that reasonable adjustments need to be made above and beyond an EHCP if necessary and reasonable. Your challenge is you haven't got your EHCP yet. Yeah,
that's your challenge. I think school trips are a really, really tricky one, and I think they're quite a grey area because you're outside of school hours. My EHCP actually says something about clubs and whatever to be flexible with care. Doesn't mean it happens. But I think what you've got to do there, Stacey, is decide for yourself what is the best for your young man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, say to him, not setting a precedent, and I'm only doing this so that, you know, but, and if it's worse that you go than he doesn't go, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So take him yourself. Do the trip yourself. You know, on a different day, so he doesn't miss out.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no easy answer to that one, I'm afraid. Anything else on that one, Marina? I think school trips, and
I do think it is the Equalities Act. It's just making sure there's no discrimination that's unfavourable to your son. Is something being done differently than for others that is really key. That's the main legislation that would be in place. And you mentioned reasonable adjustments, Darren, and exactly that. What can they put in place? If they've got a staff shortage due to the pandemic or something, that makes it equally more difficult. So it is really difficult, but just be aware of it. Are they following the same rules as for others?
What are a school's obligation when a child is presumably then on the SEN register, Marina, but not actually got an EHCP yet. So the school hasn't got designated funds for that child, but they do have ring-fenced funds for SEN, don't they?
Yeah,
so
about 6,000.
It's not,
yeah.
So they have responsibilities despite the fact the child doesn't have an EHCP yet, don't they?
They do, but yeah, within that trip, would it be for a one-to-one for that child at that point? You know, that's the grey bit. And you know, often a teacher will have a child that needs that additional support, and maybe the TAs would be looking after the groups, so that teachers got more responsibility for that child, and or doesn't have anyone, so that they're a bit more flexible and can move around the children. But that's why I think it would be preferable to talk about that kind of case separately.
Yeah, I think it's really tricky, particularly in primary school trips where parents are often asked to go along as extra pairs of hands anyway.
Yeah, they are.
It's just one of those really slightly grey areas that, you know.
And if your child was with a TA but they could see you on the trip, is that going to be difficult as well? You know, are they going to I mean, I know cases where a parent has asked to support their child and the school have said, we'd rather you didn't because it's worse. You know, that child will not behave as well as they do at school. So it does go both ways.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, full stop, going as a parent on these things, because it does whether your child's got additional needs or not, it does change their experience. I know when I've been with my elder daughter, she's probably the one who has to behave the best because mummy's on the trip. You know, it's that kind of it just does change the experience. Stacey, hope that helps a little. There isn't going to be a right or wrong answer for tomorrow.
Yeah, I know. I think it's a case of, for the moment, sucking up tomorrow, but learn, you know, not setting precedent that that's what's going to happen.
It's the beginning of the year as well, Stacey, so maybe have a chat afterwards about how this would go in the future and what provision is they can make. And
yeah, I think last time when we were told to go with him on the other one, it was the next trip, it's to prove that you can do it and it's a success, and it was a success, and now we're back here again. Yeah,
but planning early for that residential as well, so that you're not in this situation where the day before you're thinking, oh no, what's going to happen? You know, plan with the school, work with them, what can be done, where are the bits maybe you could step in. As Sarah said, sometimes the coach trip can be a nightmare for the children, or there might be the lunchtime is sometimes the problem, because it's not it's not as time bound, or you know, it's not as
it's a lack of structure, isn't it?
Yeah, not as structured as when they're at school. That can be difficult for some pupils. And you know, if that's discussed and so, well, this has worked at home, you know, can that work there? But yeah, the key thing is talking, I think, with the school.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I think, you know, I know school trips or trips, clubs, anything that's outside of that standard curriculum day just throw additional complexity into the situations. You know, it's tricky, it's a grey area. There we go. Right, anything else that anyone has got for us? Anything else, Marina, that you can think of off the top of your head that, you know, maybe not on back to school, but something else that's going on that, you know, would be useful to update people on?
I just think we've put some information up about SEN support, and there's a video on YouTube there about that and the graduated approach, which is really the stage before you start looking at whether any HCP is needed. And for year R, I think there was some more guidance on SEN, the graduated approach for early years, because that's lots of people coming into school now in the reception year. So look out for that information, or give us a call if you need some more support.
Darren, when you say you want to ask a question, do you want to send one to me, or do you mean can you talk?
Yeah, can I talk briefly? Yeah.
As long as you behave, otherwise, you know, I'll kick you out.
Yeah, no, it's only because obviously it seems that nobody else got any questions about the presentation stuff. But quickly, What do you know about the complaints procedure to the LGSCO, Marianne?
Sorry, say again. What's
to the local government ombudsman?
Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, what do you know about the complaints procedure to the local government or ombudsman?
What about making one?
Well, I'll briefly outline it quickly. We've made a complaint, and their response has been that they can't process the complaint because it's been made in my name, but the complaint that we are talking about with the council was responded to in my wife's name. So,
what?
Although it's exactly the same complaint and it's about the same person, they've said they have to send it back to the council and give them another 12 weeks to respond to it, because it may be that I've brought up different issues. I have gone back and tried to contact them and say, you're being stupid, but I can't get hold of anybody. Are they actually allowed to do that?
I've never been involved
quite
at that level. I thought you were going to ask about when you make it, Darren. So
no, that was it. I'm just curious.
That sounds yeah.
It's not like a straightforward how do we make a complaint to
it's not. It's not a straightforward question, Darren.
Fair enough. I'll leave
Maybe
that
give us a call, Darren, and we'll see if we can help.
That sounds absolutely ludicrous, Darren, but I can also see that that'll be one of those ridiculous red tape things that, you know, like I have a credit card that I can't talk to anybody about, because although it's got my name on it, my husband's name's on the blinking higher bit, and so I'm not allowed to talk to anyone about the damn card.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that that's happened, but give us a ring and we'll see if we can help you with that. Okay.
Good luck, Darren. Right, okay. I was just going to run through a few bits coming up over the next few weeks that people might, I was to say a few bits. There's the one that people might be interested in is our parent-led engagement session, which is next Tuesday, the 28th. And that's where we get Gail from SENDIASS, and we have some guys from the SEND team, and we can drill in a little bit more detail, although we've done quite a lot of detail today on various bits, into particular issues. And then we've got Meet the SEND team, not till 15th of October, so we're going forward a few weeks, but all sorts of bits and pieces coming up out there. Unless anybody else pops something up, I think we will call it a day. We've covered all sorts of bits and pieces, Marina, which weren't necessarily the bits and pieces that you prepped on, so thank you very much.
You're welcome. Did you want me to, there was something about the code of practice, was that around part-time hours?
Yeah, no, I said I'd go and see if I could find, because we did a session with I did a session with Exclusion that I will go and see if we recorded it, and I will reshare that presentation on my pages so that people can find it, because I think that could be useful and could answer some of those questions. But I think that document that you've sent is really interesting as well. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call it a day then, folks. Marina, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
And your knowledge today on all sorts of different things, much appreciated. Thank you all of you who've joined us. I hope there has been something useful in this for you somewhere. We have recorded it, so it will get put up in the next few days on our YouTube channel, and it will be shared via our various media channels. And I hope I will see you all again someday soon. Thank you very much.
Good to meet you. Thank you.
And you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye all. Good luck tomorrow, Stacey.
Thank you.